You're listening to Food Trucks in Babylon, a Western Seminary podcast with Dr. Todd Miles and Dr. Patrick Schreiner. Listen as they discuss matters of faith, theology, and culture in a post-Christian world.
Hello, this is Todd.
And this is Patrick.
And we are here with Drew Dyck, who has just published a book in 2019 called Your Future Self Will Thank You, Secrets to Self-Control from the Bible and Brain Science, a Guide for Sinners, Quitters, and Procrastinators. That covers everyone. And that is a super long title.
That's a pretty wide net. Yes, and I'm impressed you made it all the way through because it's like the longest title ever.
Yeah, it was long.
I just want to know, the biggest question for me is, does that dog have self-control on the cover?
Well, he hasn't eaten the cookies.
Okay.
So for people who haven't seen the cover, there's a dog looking longingly at a plate of cookies.
Yes.
That presumably he's not supposed to be eating.
Okay.
And so, yeah, and I've had all kinds of people claim that that's my dog. That's, yeah.
How much did you actually have to do with the cover design of your book?
Oh, you kind of go back and forth as an author,
Well, I've had very different experiences.
Oh, have you?
Like, on my first book, I saw the cover design on Amazon.
Oh,
The
no way.
First time.
Okay,
Yeah, I saw it on
that's
Amazon.
unusual.
Yes.
Usually,
Yes.
ideally, I would think the author should have some early input.
I would think so.
Because, the designer kind of comes up with a few options, and then you go, I like this one, not this one. You go back and forth. I think in my case, there were a couple rounds.
Okay.
You also
I saw
work
that
for
dog.
Moody, right?
Yeah,
So-
which is a weird sort of thing.
Yeah,
so,
right.
I'm like there
might have
as
a
an
little more.
employee
Yeah.
and an author.
Right.
A little bit different, yeah.
Which is a good introduction to you. So tell us about yourself.
Sure, yes. I am an editor and author.
Okay.
By day I say I'm an editor. If I can find some time in the evening, do my own projects, articles, and books. And I live here in the Northwest in Vancouver, Washington, just over the river from you guys. But I'm not far from the kingdom, as they say. 15 minutes from Portland.
Not far from the food carts.
Exactly. And the food gets way better when you cross over into Portland. But originally, I got to get this off my chest. I'm Canadian, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Well, that wasn't the
No, it's okay.
I
It's good.
don't know what I
It's
was
good.
expecting, what kind of reaction. But I grew up, born and raised in Canada, came down to the States. That's what we call it in Canada, the States.
The States.
Okay, yeah. It's like coming to America, like Eddie Murphy.
Eddie Murphy.
Yeah. In my early 20s to Portland, actually.
Okay.
Met my wife here. Well, she wasn't my wife at the time, but Grace, who I later married in Portland. And then we moved all over the place, and then we were always kind of pining to get back to the Northwest.
Okay.
And we're finally back. We've been back now for 4 years. We have 3 kids. I feel like I've melted into the melting pot of America because I've been down here 18 years.
Yeah.
When I go back to Canada, my friends are like, "You sound like a Southern politician." It's terrible. I've lost a lot of Canadian cred. Okay. So there it is.
I didn't even know there was such a thing as Canadian. Okay.
I don't know if anyone calls it that.
Oh, okay. All right. Excellent. All right. So you wrote a book on self-control.
You bet.
Which, as you admit, not the most sexy of topics.
Right.
In the book itself. So why?
Yeah, and I wish I could say I did it because, just out of pure academic interest. But the truth is, it was an area in which I realized I had room to grow.
Okay.
And initially, in fact, I was reading some books on the topic, both from a secular and a Christian perspective. And it was really just for myself. Like, okay, how can I kind of grow in this area? I was reading books about willpower and habits and grit and all those kind of topics.
Grit,
yeah. Gritty, how to get more gritty. And I found them, somewhat helpful for myself. And then somewhere along the line, I was like, this is some interesting stuff. Maybe there's a book project here.
Okay.
And so that's kind of the tack I take in the book is like, hey, listen, I'm not the expert. I'm not the one kind of telling you, hey, I'm this guru of self-discipline and self-control, but I'm someone probably a lot like you who struggles in this area. I want to come alongside you and let's discover this stuff together. So that was kind of my approach. Certainly didn't want to set myself up as the expert. It's funny now, though, because I'll be at a restaurant, and if I order a dessert, people are like, "Oh, just a minute. Aren't you the self-control guy? What's going on here? It's all a scam."
Mainly your wife will say that, right?
Right, exactly. Oh, man. Yeah, she rolls her eyes the most, that's for sure.
Right, yeah. You'll never outlive this book.
Never.
That's the problem.
Wow.
Never.
Yeah.
Well, and that's what makes the book, I think, very approachable, very, very readable, is that you don't come off like the expert who has mastered this. As a matter of fact, you chronicle after each chapter, there's a little vignette on how you're doing, and it's usually kind of confession time.
Right.
It feels like.
Yeah. And I wanted to kind of, take what I was learning and apply it to the laboratory of my life. And so, I have those little journal entries where I'm like, okay, I'm going to start to try to run every day, start to try to pray. That was an embarrassing one because I'm like, hey, I want to pray consistently. And I'll start with I think it was 10 minutes a day. And I set my alarm. I remember the first time, and I got right down on my knees because I work from home in my office, so I could do that. Look like a weirdo. And I remember thinking oh, something's wrong with the alarm. I set it for 10 minutes and it's been half an hour.
Yeah.
I look up at 7
time.
minutes. Yeah. So you just realize, man, okay, when you're not used to doing something consistently, how difficult it really is. Anyway, so it was enlightening. It was a little, what's the word? Disillusioning at times to see your own lack of willpower and self-control when it comes to implementing new habits in your life. But it was also a fun journey as well.
Yeah. Well, it's a fun read.
Oh, thank you.
So I really appreciate that. It's a funny book. It's a funny book, which is important, super important.
Yeah, I think with this topic too, right? Because it can get kind of finger waggy, and people are like,
yeah,
oh, yeah. Because a lot of people, when I tell them about it, they're like, self-control. It sounds like
accusatory,
puritanical and accusatory, and
right,
and maybe even legalistic, right?
Yeah.
So I wanted to avoid that, and
Well,
part
I think
of
you did.
doing that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Part of that's just being honest about the reality of your life.
Well, it's huge, and it's nice, especially in a book like this, because I think I just said that it's not the most sexy of topics, and I was quoting you in that as well.
Oh, right. Yeah. At one point, I do say that. Yeah.
Yeah, in that, but it's an important topic for everyone because we're talking about sanctification here.
Yes.
Yep. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. I think that's the bigger picture, right? Because some people might think, and it isn't sexy because our culture doesn't really prioritize it, I would say. Doesn't place a high premium on self-control and restraint, right? But you're right, especially for those of us who are believers, you can't be like, you know what, I'm not really going to worry about self-control. I'm just going to, become more like Jesus. Well, if you want to mature in your faith, right, self-control is a crucial component of that because it involves setting aside your own destructive, selfish impulses, putting others first, loving God, doing these kinds of things. So huge part of that, that $10 word, sanctification, self-control.
Do you think, in terms of what self-control is, I think we all just assume we know what we're speaking of. Do you have any? Did you have any corrections in terms of maybe we're thinking about this wrong, or is it just self-control is easily understandable and everyone gets what it is, and so you're just kind of following that path? Or do you have any thoughts in terms of I think I read over self-control,
right? Yeah,
because I just am I know what that is. It
is saying no to something bad,
right?
Yeah, and I think most people
you do
think
more than that
in the negative. Yeah, you're right. It's and that was one of the difficulties I encountered early on because I'd read about self-control, and some people are talking about self-regulation. Some people are talking about delaying gratification, and maybe I just cheated because I said I think it's all of those.
Yeah,
it's saying no to sinful or destructive impulses. That's for sure. It's also kind of overcoming your own laziness to do the good you ought to do, right? Yeah. So it's sins of omission and commission, avoiding both, right? Yeah. And then, but here's the other wrinkle for people that are Christians, we don't believe we're in this alone, right? It's not just bootstrapping your way to, okay, that's it. I'm going to white knuckle it, live a life of self-control. It's all on me, sheer willpower. We believe that God plays this mysterious role in the process, right? Whereby his spirit, he empowers you to live the life that he's called you to live. So that's good news too, because if we're doing it on our own, man, that's rough.
Yeah.
And yet it's not just let go and let God.
Yes.
It does take effort. It takes a plan. It's hard, this whole sanctification thing.
Yeah, when I talk to people about this topic, I've found there's kind of two ways to fall off the horse, right? There's one where the I'm going to do this all on my own, kind of bootstrapping your way. I'm going to just live the Christian life all by myself and build my self-control. And then, like you said, though, the opposite and equal error, I think, is to the old Keswick theology, right? Let go and let God. Yep. Jesus, take the wheel, to use a more recent reference. That's right. I'm not bashing on that song, okay? Don't write me, okay?
It's okay if you bash on
Is
that
it okay?
song.
Okay,
Yeah,
totally
it's
fine.
okay.
I'll bash on it. So, but that theology, is sometimes kind of saying, listen, I'm just totally passive in this journey of the Christian life. I'm going to kick back and take a pleasure cruise towards holiness. And that sounds wonderful, right? I'd love that if that were the case. However, when I read Scripture, at least according to my interpretation, I don't see that. I see commands to strive after godliness, to endure, to persevere, to run the race, to fight the fight. All of those great commandments, right, that imply an effortful sort of enterprise, a struggle. But then at the same time, like I said, you're not alone in it either.
That's right.
As you obey God, he empowers you to live the Christian life and enables self-control. And of course, self-control is a fruit of the Spirit. So that's an important thing to mention too.
Yep.
Which is why in Christianity we have these just weird grammatical things called passive imperatives, right? Where we are commanded to have something be done to us, right? Be filled with the Spirit, right? It's a command. It's okay. How do I do that? Do I grit my teeth? How do I? It's not like Shazam, right? I can't do that, and yet I'm supposed to. I am commanded to do this thing.
Exactly. That's great. Passive imperatives. I haven't heard it put that way.
Yeah.
That is so true, and it is an odd sort of thing.
I just want to point out that came from the systematic guy, while the New Testament guy's over here silent.
I'm looking at Drew's tweets right now. I'm not.
That's right. Let me learn you a few things about grammar, Patrick.
Yeah. Did you have any reflections in the book in terms of this? You hear self-control, and it obviously leans towards a more individualistic thing. Do you have any thoughts in terms of communal family? Like, is this something like that Paul or the rest of the scripture writers, as they use this, is this mainly an individual thing? I think it leans that way, but do you have any thoughts about, like, is this a thing that the body should be thinking of too, as the body of Christ, or even entire family units? What does it look like to have self-control? Because I hear it and I immediately go to individualism, and I think that's probably right, but I was just trying to think through, like, how does this work in terms of maybe larger structures as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think you're right. Just the term, obviously, self-control.
Right, self.
Sounds individual, right?
Right.
And there is that component because it's you. And of course, like we've acknowledged, it's complicated because God's involved. There's a role for human agency, but you're controlling your behavior in obedience with God's word. But at the same time, I think it's a hugely communal virtue, right? And it's, one of the things, and I know I'm not the first to observe this, certainly, but when you look at the fruit of the Spirit, Galatians 5, they all have a very communal dimension, right? Yep. Gentleness, peace, joy.
You have to do it with others.
Long-suffering, self-control. Exactly. You do it with others, and it facilitates interpersonal harmony. Right. All of these, and they're not really even virtues. They're more like states of being or modes of operating. Anyway, and self-control is no different, right? Because you need, and I think that's what Paul has an eye toward when he's listing those, because he's like, you need these to get along with each other. And self-control, I think, that's at the top of the list. I mean, my goodness, if you don't have self-control, you can't be faithful. You can't be kind. You can't be generous. You know, even just the most basic altruism demands being able to set your own interests aside and put others first. So to answer the question, I think that's all throughout Scripture. It's both, and it's incredibly important. Whether you're talking about a marriage, a family, a church body, self-control. If you look at the failures and the destructive things that happen in a community, they often trace back to a lack of self-control, at the very least.
And you have in that first chapter, why self-control? Because it leads to freedom and flourishing, which is so intuitive, because the mantra that we hear from our society is express yourself is basically what we need to do in whatever way that is. And that is what leads to freedom and flourishing. But actually controlling yourself, you're saying that's actually what leads to freedom and flourishing. Do you want to expand upon that?
Yeah, precisely. No, and you're right, because it's a very countercultural message when you're talking about self-control. Because people think of it as confining. I want to follow my heart. I want to express my every desire. I want to fulfill my passions. And then they go, self-control means curtailing some of those. And that's true. But this is one of the beautiful paradoxes. And of course, these are all throughout the Christian faith, right? And all throughout theology, is that exercising self-control, being obedient to God, ultimately results in greater freedom because he knows what's best for us.
Right.
So ultimately, it's going to lead to a life of greater flourishing. And I think just on an intuitive level, people know this is true. I mean,
it's true with everything.
Yeah, I mean, like
exactly.
credit cards, okay?
Yep.
Yeah, it's fun to spend money on credit cards. I've done a lot of that.
Right.
All right, and you rack
Right.
it up and you're having a blast. Well, what happens down the road, right?
Yeah.
It actually confines you, and all of a sudden
Even
you have
more.
to work harder and you
Yeah.
can't spend as much and you're in
Yeah.
trouble, right? So that principle runs throughout all of life.
Yeah.
If you want to indulge your every desire now, you're going to pay for it down the
You're gonna
road.
pay for it,
Your
yeah.
life's going to just kind of get smaller and smaller and smaller. I think of James when he talks about that trajectory of sin, right? Where it's just
Yeah.
kind of like innocent little desire, and then all of a sudden it gives birth to death.
To death.
in the end.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this book is timeless in the sense that we've been dealing with
a timeless classic.
timeless classic. That's right.
I didn't know where you were going with that.
Well, that's exactly what I was going to say. That's what I was going to say. No, so the need for self-control has been around ever since like Genesis 3. Okay,
Right.
but is there a greater sense of urgency today because of things that we face? Do you think?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I don't want to overstate it because, of course, people in every era have had
Sure.
unique challenges.
Right.
I take this one over living to 38 and
Yeah.
having
Nick
dysentery
yourself
or-
shaving and die the next morning.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Anyway, so yeah, I think every era is unique, but I do think, because of the internet,
Yeah.
that's the big thing. And what the internet does, I think, is it doesn't create new temptations, but it amplifies existing ones. So whatever your vice is, whether it's lust, it's literally at your fingertips now. Well, I don't know, gambling, that's easier, spending too much money, whatever it is, the internet just facilitates it all, makes it easier and more accessible. And then I think on another level, just more the
And
neurological.
it doesn't make it public.
Right.
Which it used to be.
You're right. That's a
Right.
great point.
Which used to be, you used to at least have to risk some social approbation by engaging in these behaviors. Now there's no risk at all.
Yeah.
Isn't that true? Exactly. Which just makes it easier to engage in, and more pernicious in a way, because these things are all invisible. At least you think they are. No, that's a great point. And then I think just in the way that we're being inundated with constant entertainment, constant messages, constant distractions, then I think that makes it harder to engage in the life of the Spirit. So reading your Bible, when your attention span, as mine is been conditioned by Twitter and Instagram and Netflix, right?
Yep.
And then you try to go and read this. I know it's easy for you guys, you theologians, but for regular folk like me, diving into this ancient big text, right? It's hard. Or prayer or community. All these things require these, discipline and longer attention spans. So I think there is a way in which our hyper-connected, media-rich world is antithetical to the Christian life in many ways that we underappreciate, perhaps.
Yeah.
And again, of course, bringing it back to my little pet issue, self-control is a big part of resisting that.
We just had John Mark Comer on the podcast to talk about unhurry and unhurried life. So for silence and solitude, and we were talking about. I don't know if he dubbed it this way or I don't remember, but we were talking about what we call the quiet time generation. That you look at some of the older Christians in the church now, and they're just very consistent with getting up, reading the scriptures. And he was just noting, like in a younger congregation, he feels like some of that is being lost, and he's trying to recover like the quiet time generation, like that you just get up and you have some time with the Lord with your scriptures. And I have seen that. I noticed that there's a previous generation that is very committed to that maybe some of that's being lost. And I think you're hitting on it. It's just very easy in the morning to get up to the alarm on your phone then get on email and start doing work right away and get fired up about something, or get on Twitter and get fired up about some
get out of bed.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
And just thinking about, like, you're hearing something about Donald Trump immediately, or you're hearing something about something that's happening overseas that's awful, or whatever it is, and suddenly your whole day is just shifted towards kind of this. You're not actually communing with the Lord at the beginning. So that
You got that social outrage, blood pumping
already.
Right
Yeah,
It
before
does
your
get you
kids
up,
even
though.
get up.
It gets you awake.
Yeah, that's right.
That's right. I'm doing important stuff because I'm angry.
Someone's wrong on the internet.
No, you're absolutely right. And it's interesting because when I hear the word the phrase quiet time, it sounds kind of old timey.
It does.
Because that's, when I grew up with, like, your quiet time with the Lord and stuff. And it's like, it sounds a little cheesy.
Yeah.
But I think we need that. You're right. And I love even the phrase now, quiet time, because we desperately
It's like
need
the
that.
80s. It's coming back.
Yeah, there you go. It's coming. We're gonna bring it back.
That's my decade, man. That's my decade. That's all I
Todd,
listen to on the radio.
you need to dress more like you're from the 80s because, athletes in action, Nike shirt, not working for 80s.
Yeah, I will bring back my new members jackets and all that. Is that what they were called? Or
I don't know.
Members only.
Yeah,
jacket.
members only.
Members only jacket.
Members
yes.
only. That's right.
New member sounds like a boy band or something. I don't know. Anyway.
Plus one.
Yeah.
Isn't that a boy band? Where are we? What are we talking about now?
I don't know anything
Drew,
about boy
about
bands.
about self-control.
I love it. No. So I love that idea of needing quiet time. Okay, and so one of the things I did in the book was I wanted to try to read my Bible first thing every morning, which sounds super simple, but it isn't, like we've been talking about.
Right.
And I realized that, initially I tried to read it on my phone.
Yep.
Right. But like you said, I was trained like a lab rat to roll out of bed every morning, grab my phone, and get on social media first thing.
Right.
And then number 2 was email.
Yep.
And then you get that email, you're like, oh no, okay, I
gotta
got to
deal with
reply to
this.
that.
Yep.
And then you're into the work day.
Yep.
And then a kid wanders into your room.
Yeah.
It's over.
Yeah.
Right. As far as reading your Bible, it's like,
Right.
I'll get to that later. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
You know? And so I realized what I finally had to do is move my phone off my nightstand, drag my big black Bible out of retirement, plunk it down there.
Yeah.
But it was kind of beautiful.
Buy an alarm clock? Did you buy an alarm clock?
No, I still use the phone.
Still use that.
But I had it like in a different part of the room.
Right.
So like you have to get
up.
up.
Yes.
To
So you have to
actually
get up,
turn it
which
off.
is miserable.
Yeah.
Which is
Yeah.
really
You can
terrible.
still get alarm clocks on Amazon.
Yeah, right. I mean, they exist.
They do?
My parents have one.
You could steal one from
You-
someone
you
who's
gotta
doing a
think-
quiet time.
Yeah, you got to think the sales are in steep decline
That's
for
right.
alarm clocks. But
Not,
anyway,
not something I'm investing in right now.
not a smart stock buy. But what I found was, what was kind of nice is that I was conditioned to consume content as soon as I rolled out of bed.
Right.
And so it was like, okay, if the Bible's there instead of my phone, it made it easier. It's just a simple little silly
shift.
switch,
Yep.
but it actually made a big difference for me.
That's great. Yeah. Well, this has been really helpful. We're going to take a little break and come back and keep on talking about self-control.
My name is Ryan, and I'm in the Master of Arts in Counseling program here at Western Seminary. My favorite part about this program is that the faculty really does care about the well-being and development of each and every counseling student enrolled here. One way they do that is by meeting to discuss how all of us are doing academically, personally, and spiritually. They shepherd us, mentor us, and teach us how to have healing conversations with hurting people. Western Seminary serves as a catalyst and resource for spiritual transformation by providing, with and for the church, advanced training for strategic ministry roles. If you're interested in learning more about Western or starting your application, visit us online at westernseminary.edu. Now back to the show.
Okay, welcome back. Drew, so one of the things we do is called Food Trucks in Babylon, is ask you about a food truck that you've been enjoying. So since you're in the area, can you give a recommendation to people?
Yes, I can. Usually, because I'm out in the burbs, I'm eating at like Applebee's or something, okay?
Oh, no.
And I got 3 kids,
Oh,
so
no.
hauling them into Portland to go to food trucks is
Yeah.
a rare sort of
that's
thing.
true.
But
Yeah.
with that caveat, I ate at one recently that was delicious called Matt's Barbecue.
Oh, yeah.
It's kind of like North Port. I think they have a couple locations.
Yeah.
They do?
Yep.
Oh, man, but it's
So
so
good.
good. I got the whole shebang.
Yep.
I shared with a guy, and it was just delicious.
I've had Matt's Barbecue.
You've
It's
had it?
amazing.
Yes.
I'm preaching to the choir here.
Yep. That's
Isn't that
great.
good stuff?
It's great. Yeah.
Oh,
They have a taco one too,
Just
Oh,
right-
really?
Yeah.
Just
Oh,
right
okay.
down the street here.
right down the street. And
That's
so
my
they do their
next-
barbecue in tacos with guacamole and onions. It's amazing.
Awesome.
So you should try that.
Awesome.
If it wasn't 9 a.m., maybe we'd go after this.
Yeah.
And it wasn't raining.
Oh, I can
Profusely.
eat barbecue anytime. You can wake me up at 2 a.m.
It's actually
Speaking of self-control.
Oh,
yeah.
yeah, right.
it's actually 6 a.m. We thought we'd exercise self-control
And we've
and
already
record this
run
at 6
10
a.m.
miles.
That's
this
right.
morning.
I just assumed that.
Yes.
I
Thank you.
assumed
I shouldn't have even had to say.
Right. Well, you deal in your book with habits. I know there's been a lot written in terms of habits from a more sociological perspective. What did you find most helpful in terms of your reading, maybe outside of, I think a lot of our listeners are engaged in the scriptures, but maybe not engaged in reading more widely on how habits form at a sociological level. Do you have any kind of key things that you took away from some of your reading and maybe your own practices as well in terms of habits?
Yeah, sure. I found it helpful to kind of read the literature on habits and, how long does it take a habit to form? And there's conflicting literature on that. Is it 30 days? Well, yes, for some sort of simple things. For more complex behaviors, it's more like 66. And what constitutes...
That's a bad number, though.
That's a bad... Oh!
It's almost a bad number.
If you added one more 6, it'd be a really bad number.
30 days. 30 days. And if it's more, then we're going to have to republish all of those 30 days of...
You're right. I should have said it was like 40, like a more biblical number.
Yeah. 40 days. Yeah.
40 days. 40 days works. Anyway, so, those things were helpful. And then breaking down what a habit is, they talk about the 3 components. There's the cue, the thing that initiates the routine. And then there's the routine, the actual behavior. And then there's a reward that kind of enforces the behavior.
Yeah.
And so, and it's funny because I think some Christians kind of go, we don't need to talk about habits. That's, extra biblical, which of course it is. And at the same time, when I was reading about habits and then I'd go back to scripture, I'd be like, it's incredible to me how, God knows that we're habitual creatures, right? That we, and would even think of like, it doesn't matter. Even if
and that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Exactly. That's just how we're made.
Right.
And even like the lowest church traditions have a ton of repetition, which is basically how you implement habits, right? And it's why we show up to church and sing songs that we know so well, listen to truths that most of us, let's face it, already know, right? Because we need to be reminded. We need those patterns in our lives. But yeah, and so it was just helpful for me. They say this is kind of one of the cardinal truths of habits is that it's easiest to replace a bad habit with a good one rather than creating a new one out of thin air. So like I talked about in the first section was, I had this bad habit of checking social media every morning. And I was able to replace it with Bible reading. And what I was doing, the cue was the same, rolling out of bed and seeing something on my nightstand. But I just kind of hacked the habit loop and replaced that with reading.
So you modify your pattern. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly, right.
Yeah.
And so,
It sounds like Thomas Chalmers at this point, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The Scottish preacher.
Yeah.
Let me see. I don't want to butcher the quote, but
expulsive power of
new
affection. Is that right?
That's it. The expulsive power of a new affection. What a great phrase.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
And I think it captures such a truth, right, of the Christian life, that resisting sin or bad behaviors is not just a matter of kind of white knuckling it and sitting there and going, okay, I'm just going to fend off every temptation that comes my way. But it's actually filling yourself up with the things of God. Obeying Jesus's command to come to me when you're thirsty, right? So that your thirst for transcendence and purpose and meaning is being satisfied by God, and then it has a way of pushing sin out of your life. I don't know if I'm reading Chalmers right in that, but I think that's kind of the idea, this replacement affection, right?
Exactly.
And so, in a funny little way, I guess habits, that's what you're doing when you're replacing destructive, sinful habits with good ones.
Yeah. You can't just stop doing a vice. You have to replace it with the opposite virtue.
Exactly. Exactly.
So walk us through that habit loop. You mentioned, the cue, the routine, the reward, but like just practically in your life, again, and then put the words to it.
Sure. Yeah.
If you would.
Well, and I'm trying to think of a good example, and this isn't for my life because I'm not a smoker, but you think of someone who is a smoker, and maybe the cue would be to, when they step outside in the morning and they just, I need a cigarette, right? The smoking the cigarette is the routine, and then the reward
because that's the habit they have.
That's the habit they have. Right.
And there's something that cues that habit.
Yes, exactly. That
consciously
kind of
or
triggers
self-consciously.
them. Okay. Yeah, it triggers them to engage in a habit. And we have these all throughout our lives. We don't even realize it.
Right.
And then the reward, I guess, would be the nicotine hitting the bloodstream. And you could replace that. Say you want to replace it with running, a more healthy habit, right? Yeah. So maybe now going outside, the same cue.
Well, that's an example you used in the book.
Yes, right. Yeah. You got the same cue. You're going outside, but instead of smoking, now you're running. and the reward is the endorphins, I guess.
Yeah.
Right.
That like runner's high that
The
doesn't
runner's
actually
high.
exist.
The
Matt,
mythical
you can eat
runner's
Matt's
high.
barbecue afterwards.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
Well, no. I
Yeah.
think you could do something artificial at
Right.
that point. You would need to make up a reward. To
Yes.
reinforce.
Yeah.
And it feels
I can
cheesy.
buy $500 Nike shoes. That's my reward.
As long as I'm sure your wife would be cool with that, right?
Yeah, as
Honey,
long as-
I got to give myself a reward.
As long
if
as
this
I put it on
habit's gonna stick.
Instagram
Yeah.
and hashtag
The
it.
explosive power of a worse vice.
Professors and sneakers.
Yeah.
Oh, it's just a matter of time before
That's
that
right.
Instagram
That's
account
right.
is created.
But nobody cares about professors, so probably not.
And let's face it, professors probably couldn't afford
Yeah, they
don't know.
can't.
the
They can't.
$5,000 sneakers.
We don't
Patrick
determine our own
is wearing
salary.
Air Jordans right now.
That's
If
true.
you look under that, he
That's
is wearing
true.
Air Jordans.
I'll lift it up right here.
It's true. I can verify it. I know there's no video, but I can verify it.
Verified. All right.
Awesome.
Well, in some ways, it seems that Paul is forming new habits as he goes into this is what it looks like to live the Christian life, right? So he's strengthening. You talk about it's a way to strengthen puny muscles, right? So how do you grow those things? Does that go back to the habit kind of the habit conversation
Habit
again in
loop.
terms?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I think a lot of the biblical writers are aiming to introduce and to grow new habits, and with the understanding that that we're weak creatures and that we need this. So one of the interesting things I found early on researching for this book was about willpower, and essentially what sociologists found out maybe 20, 30 years ago now with a series of experiments is that willpower, our ability to like withstand temptation or do something difficult, is a finite resource. In other words, it's limited. It runs out, and it does so rather quickly.
Yep.
Of course, as Christians, we're probably not surprised by that.
Yeah.
That was a super interesting part of the book, though.
Oh,
I
thanks.
thought. Yeah.
Yeah, that was interesting to me too, and it made sense of a lot of my lived experience. Where it's like if you've just done something really difficult, something that's depleted your willpower, then you're very vulnerable to temptation or just to being a jerk afterwards. And this is where habits though come in, because habits are so cool because they don't expend willpower. Right? When you are doing a habit, by definition, it's an automatic routine. And so you're either expending very little willpower or none at all because it's on.
So you're not tapping into that finite resource of willpower at that point.
Exactly. And it's such a precious commodity, willpower, and it's so limited. And it can grow, right? As you exercise, it's kind of like a muscle. As you exercise it, it grows. But the ideal thing is to build in habits in your life that can carry you, so you're not relying on your willpower. John Ortberg, the pastor, he has a great phrase, a great quote. He says that habits eat willpower for breakfast. In other words, two guys going into a situation, say a tempting situation, difficult one.
Yeah.
One relying on willpower, one relying on good habits.
Yeah. Habits
Bet
will win every
on the
time.
habits
Yeah,
guy
on the habits.
every single time.
And then another thing I thought was interesting, that an implication that you bring out in the book is that because willpower's finite, sometimes, most of the time, the best strategy is to flee temptation.
Right.
Just because why count on depleting your store of willpower? Just get out of the situation.
Amen. Exactly. And some people think, it's a cop-out. I
Yeah,
should sit there and stare it down.
Yeah.
Nope.
And be super spiritual.
Right. That's why the Bible says flee temptation, right?
Right.
Don't sit there and slug it out, man. You're going to lose. Even if you can withstand temptation initially, you get weaker as you go. That's the sobering thing. So if you can. Now, of course, you can't always, right?
Right.
And that's where you need
That's
self-control.
self-control, because they
That's where-
sometimes say also stop. Just
Right.
stop doing this.
Yeah.
So that's kind of they're bringing both the willpower and that self-control kind of together, and recognizing we're holistic humans. All of these things need to come into play.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But if you can get out of there, man, that's the best strategy.
So what if someone said, "Oh, this sounds great, but there's not much grace in here"? It sounds like this is work your way towards self-control. Like this isn't gospel. This is
Right.
This is willpower, self-help. What do you think about that?
Well, there's a danger of that with this topic. I'll just say that right off the bat. A lot of what I read on this topic, and of course, a lot of it was secular, but was very legalistic. Man, it's all on you, and you just got to do this. And then, okay, here are some life hacks that make it a little easier. Okay.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, that's something that's huge if we're talking about it from a Christian perspective. Grace has to not only be involved, but I would say it has to be central.
Right.
And then, of course, one of the problems with this topic, I think a lot of people assume that grace and self-control are somehow antithetical to one another, or at least different, right? And the thinking, of course, is that, well, why do I need self-control if God's just always going to forgive me? More grace on tap, right? Why do I need to control? And of course, the Apostle Paul anticipates this sort of thinking. He says, shall we go on sinning that grace may abound? By no means, or heaven forbid, depending on your translation.
Paul believes in grace, and he gives lots of commands.
That's exactly right. And most of the passages I looked at, frankly, were from Paul, right? About exercising self-control. But I think it even goes, not only are they not mutually exclusive or opposite, but they're actually complementary. And actually, I'll go to some studies that I read about that I thought were interesting that kind of illustrated this for me. There was one from diet researchers, actually. They coined this term called the what the hell effect.
Yes.
Very scientific sounding sort of thing. But basically, they observed that when people are on a diet and they have one small indiscretion, say it was eating a slice of cake or a candy bar or something, what would follow that mistake was often a full-on binge. And I've totally been there, right? You just like, I messed up the diet. I'm just going to polish off this bag of Doritos, right? Because they felt bad about themselves. They felt like they'd ruined it. And they also talked about the opposite phenomenon, which was the fresh start effect. And that was this idea that when people perceive they have a blank slate, that they're starting new, their behavior actually improves. And I just thought it was interesting as a Christian. Of course, we have the ultimate fresh start effect, right? We are adopted into God's family. We're forgiven entirely. And what I think just psychologically, what follows that, if you really internalize grace, if you kind of get it in your bones, what follows that is not a desire to sin. You don't want to go, woohoo, I'm just going to go crazy now and engage all these awful, sinful behaviors. What you want to do is live a life of obedience. And so I think grace is actually the fuel of self-control. And incidentally, when it comes to motivating people, I'm thinking this as a parent now, right? The answer isn't to just pile on guilt, because that actually just makes people feel bad about themselves, and then they engage in bad behavior. But it's to keep diving back into grace and forgiveness. So I think it's actually central to this topic.
And to get really nerdy, John Barclay has done really good work on what grace is. He's a scholar overseas, but he just argues we've misunderstood what grace is in the scriptures, that it's a gift. But in the ancient times, when a gift was given, it assumed reciprocation. It assumed that you would actually act in response. So the modern notion of a gift that you don't do anything in response to, just thank you, that's great. That is a modern construct. And so when we hear the word for grace, charis, is the same word for gift. And so we've received a gift, but it actually requires that we do something in return, not to earn it, because it's already been given to us.
Right.
He's very clear on that. But it totally shifted how I think of that word grace, because it does require reciprocation. That's why you've been given this, therefore have self-control, discipline, gentleness. You know what I mean? Like it actually begins to make sense. That's how you honor the one who has given you that gift. So when you have a patron-client relationship, in the ancient times, in the first century, you would honor the one who would give you a gift by reciprocating to them. And so that suddenly brought this, like, grace doesn't mean you don't have to do anything. It actually means you have to do more.
Right.
Does that make sense? Because you've been given this amazing thing, and you didn't deserve it. He's very clear. It's undeserving.
Right.
But that actually changes how you act because you have received this undeserved gift. So I found that really helpful.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
But why didn't you tell me that before I wrote the book?
You don't talk to me enough, Drew.
I guess not. No, that's awesome. And I love that. Like you said, obviously, it's not that you're earning it.
Right.
But it activates something.
It activates.
And you
That's
have
right.
a
like
response.
You said, it's a power. It's a power in you now. Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Well, this whole topic's really about sanctification, and there's classes we teach here at Western Seminary on models of sanctification. We work through that in the theology class, and it is remarkable how different the views are within Christianity about how you grow in self-control.
Right.
Just to put the two polar opposites. One would be that more Keswick, let go and let God. It's all grace. I have to get off the throne of my life, which is a campus crusade or cruise sort of thing, and let Jesus take over. And then maybe on a more opposite side would be a more reformed model, which is all about mortifying the flesh, right? And doing this. And yet the scriptures speak really kind of to both of those. There's a tension.
Yes. And I think they both contain some truth, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, you do need to get off the throne of your life and submit to God and put yourself aside and die to yourself. And you also have to get a little muscular about this and go, I'm going to mortify the flesh. Not that you're going to get weird, right? Start whipping yourself or something.
Yeah.
But that's right in Scripture, to mortify the flesh, to deny yourself.
And then there's all these carrots put out for us as well, these rewards, right? I mean, even there's a reward that speaks of earnestly anticipating and waiting for the return of Christ, because in this world, I think the Lord knows that's not going to be easy. It's easy to just kind of shift into the next thing and forget. Boy, the most fervent desire of my heart should be that Jesus Christ return quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you see that in Paul when he's talking about running the race, right? It's for the prize.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's not just like, okay, I want to look good or something. There's an ultimate goal and a reward that is motivating this. And that's huge. Another thing that I talk about in the book is sanctified goals. The researchers talk about, and it's secular researchers, but they observe that when people attach spiritual significance to their goals, and sometimes you can do that artificially, but if they're good goals, you should probably imbue them with some spiritual significance. You want to have a better marriage. Even if you want to be physically healthier, you should not just think of it in terms of, I want to look better in the mirror, but hey, God has given me this body. I want to have more energy to pursue God's call in my life, what have you. And then the cool thing is you actually are more effective in reaching those goals if they are, as they say, sanctified goals.
Maybe some people are stepping into the new year and they're trying to have some more self-control in certain areas. You have a whole chapter on the age of distraction. And I know we talked about like the bedside phone thing. Do you have any other things that you read that you've either implemented or you've heard people implement in terms of self-control, especially in that age of distraction, digital era, that you feel like we're just, man, that maybe that's something that we need to consider more in terms of how we interact with our phones? I mean, the phone is the big thing, TVs, whatever it is. Any other thoughts in terms of just kind of practical helps for people?
Yeah, sure. And this is such a struggle for me, honestly. I mean, I remember one time going to, and it was just like one time, I went to a restaurant and I'm waiting in line and discovered I didn't have my phone. Start to kind of itch, and I'm like, oh man, this is awful.
This is weird. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, because they're just always with us. And anyway. And so one thing that I read about is what researchers call a bright lines strategy. And this just refers to hard and fast rules that you implement in your life. I know this is going to sound a little legalistic. I think it's just wise, though, that are sort of that you just can't do certain behaviors at certain times. So, for instance, an example of that might be no phone past 8 p.m.
Yep.
Okay?
Yeah.
And the beauty of this, again, it preserves willpower, because if it's 8:30 and you're wanting to look at your phone and you go, oh, no, it's past that time.
Yep.
I don't do it.
Andy Crouch calls it parenting your phone. I love that.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
Because if you don't parent your phone will parent you.
Exactly.
That's
yeah.
the absolute
You're
truth.
putting it to bed.
Yeah.
Good night, phone.
Good night, phone. Good night, moon. To it.
Sorry, Todd, you can't text me past 8 p.m. No. Actually.
Yeah. So anyway,
I'm the one texting at 10 p.m. Aaron. Yes.
My mom texts me at like 5 a.m., which is awesome because we have a baby that wakes up. Anyway.
I totally interrupted you.
No.
Going.
Yeah. That was basically it. It's just to kind of, and another one my family has done very imperfectly, I'll admit, is having a no screen Sunday.
Yeah.
And it's just what it sounds like, right?
Yep.
Where the kids aren't watching cartoons, dad's not
Gotcha.
a phone zombie.
Yeah.
And when we've broken it, it's usually my fault. But it does help, man, just to I think with the inundation of tech, and the ubiquity of it, and how immersive and engaging it is, if you don't make some intentional efforts to curb its influence in your life, it will just run roughshod over your life, right? So you need to kind of carve out those spaces where its tentacles aren't reaching in and controlling you.
Yeah, for sure.
It sounds kind of spooky, but I think it's true.
Yeah.
so
Every
that's
family dynamic or individual dynamic is going to look different, obviously. So it's hard to give like, this is what you should do, hard and fast rules, but there's some wisdom in terms of recognizing how some of these things are taking over your life. I've noticed that in my own life and just said, okay, I need to make some. My wife and I talked about like buying a box actually that we put our phones in, just to have some physical limit. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because
I'm gonna steal that.
It's so easy. We haven't done it yet, but
I'll beat you to it.
It's so easy because if you just even say I'm putting it up, usually up is a place where you can grab it pretty easily.
Yeah.
But just to have that like, oh, something's
or I'm just going to put it in my phone.
Right.
Or in my pocket, I mean. Yeah.
Exactly. It's there. And so just having some sort of we're going to live by in this strategy. We've noticed with our kids, just we think we have young kids, so 9 to 2, 4, oldest one is 9, youngest one is 2, and I always reflect on the time is just so short in those ages, and if I'm interacting with someone who's wrong on the internet rather with them, like, am I going to regret that? I think I certainly will regret that in terms of.
I can speak from a little experience on that one.
Yeah.
Yes, you will. Yes, you will.
Exactly.
Yes, you will. Because they do. Time goes by.
So we need a lockbox. Isn't that an old like political?
It's like Al Gore.
Yeah, Al Gore.
Yeah, circa like 2002. A lockbox.
A lockbox.
There's like great SNL skits.
That's what I'm thinking.
Right?
I think I only know it from SNL.
Yeah, well, that's where you get most of your political news, right?
Exactly.
That's great. No, it's but the struggle, as they say, is real when it comes to tech, because it's just so prevalent. And I think some people, I've read some things, frankly, that are like super unrealistic. It's like, okay, do email once a month. It's like, dude, if I do that, I'm fired. Okay.
Right.
Like, right. There are certain things, or like you said, it has to fit your
fit.
particular situation, your family, your job.
Right.
And so you got to be realistic about it, because the biggest way to fail into these things, by the way, and I want to say this too, if people are implementing New Year's resolutions.
Yeah.
The biggest mistake that I've made, that other people make, is to go way too big.
Yeah.
That's
exactly.
it. I'm going to run 10 miles every day. I'm going to eat kale. That's it. Whatever. You
only
are setting
kale.
The only kale diet, sweeping the nation. Because then what happens, going back to willpower, you deplete your willpower immediately because the goal is just way too big.
Yep.
You need to be incremental and realistic about your life.
Totally. At the end of every Greek 1 class here at Western, I tell students, just read 5 minutes a day in Greek.
Oh,
you know what I mean?
Good.
Like,
Yes.
I was like, don't try to be like, I'm going to do an hour each day. You won't. Yeah. So I say, just try 5 minutes a day, and maybe not every day. Just do it 3 times a week. Like, just start small.
Right.
Keep this language in you. So I think that's huge. Just give realistic goals to yourself. Everyone's busy. We understand that. Yeah.
Nice. Well, Drew, thanks so much for being here. This is a good book. Your Future Self Will Thank You, Secrets to Self-Control from the Bible, Brain Science, A Guide for Sinners, Quitters, and Procrastinators. I had to read it correctly this time.
And you got the whole thing in there.
We can re-record that.
The longest title ever.
There you go.
Nice.
Yeah.
But it is a very good book. It is very readable and very, very helpful as well. So thanks for being with us, and thanks for writing this book.
Great to have you
fun. Thanks
in
so
the
much,
area.
guys. Yes.
Yeah, thanks for coming on.
Hey, this is Todd. We have received a lot of good feedback on this podcast. We have also received some questions. You have been emailing them to us, and we want to encourage you to consider that.
That's right. So we plan on doing an episode where we just answer questions. So we'd love to have you send those things in to podcast@westernseminary.edu, podcast singular at westernseminary.edu. And Todd, how can they send those questions?
Well, you can either type them out in the email, but what would be even better is if you created an audio file asking the question and send that to us.
Right. We need to keep that at 20 seconds and we'll play it. And so send in. We'd love to hear the audio clip of your voice. We'd play it and then we'd answer the question as best we can. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to Food Trucks in Babylon. The music you hear is provided by our friends at Humble Beast Records. If you like the show, please leave us a review and feel free to subscribe. To learn more about Western Seminary, visit us at westernseminary.edu.